Hello everyone, in this Blender video tutorial we will be modeling a mushroom. So let's begin by adding a cylinder with 24 vertices. Move it along the x-axis, scale it down along the x and y axis, and scale it up along the z-axis. Maybe scale it down a bit further along the x and y axis, like this. Use a smooth shading. Apply rotation and scale. Switch into side view, and we're gonna add several loop cuts. Now I have 26 loop cuts. That should be enough. Maybe scale it up a bit more along the z-axis. This, and apply rotation and scale. Now check this box to grab all the vertices and not just those that are visible, like this at the bottom. Gonna enable proportional editing, select a sharp fall off. I'm gonna scale up the vertices at the bottom of the stem, like this. Not too much. And switch to a sphere fall off. Grab this edge here. Edge loop and scale these along the x and y axis. Maybe we'll select the lower edge. Like this. Now let's add a subdivision surface modifier with one subdivision. Can also grab maybe these. We're gonna scale these down along the x and y axis. This. Okay. Now let's select all those faces here. Maybe scale them down a bit along the z-axis. We're gonna be creating what is known as a ring. So let's extrude and scale along the y and x axis like this. And again, move these down like this. Let's grab this loop, scale it up a bit, and move it down along the z-axis, like that. Okay. Maybe this is a bit too long of a ring. Move them up a bit and scale them down. Okay. Now let's apply the Subsurface Modifier. And let's add another one with one subdivision. And let's grab a few vertices along the bottom of the ring. It's a bit too close. And enable proportional editing, use a smooth fall off, and we're gonna pull these vertices down like this. And we created a ring. Let's apply rotation and scale. And then we're gonna be creating the cap of the mushroom. So let's add a single vertex. Move it up like this. Disable proportional editing and extrude it like this. Again, again, again. Like this, and make sure the last vertex has a y coordinate of 0. Now let's add a screw modifier. So a simple line becomes a mushroom cap. Check, flip, merge vertices so that the vertices at the very center are merged. Maybe we can scale it up a bit on the z-axis. And also let's move it at the center of the stem, so snap cursor to the stem and snap the selection to the cursor and move it up like this. Then add a subdivision surface modifier with 1 subdivision. Apply rotation and scale, and we will apply both of these modifiers right now. Now select all of the vertices. We're gonna go into transform and randomize this a bit to give it a more organic aspect. So set normal to 1, and this is a bit too much maybe. Let's add another subdivision surface modifier like this. And also, the effect looks always a bit more extreme at the center of a cylinder-shaped object. So we're gonna grab these vertices. I'm gonna smooth this up a bit, enable proportional editing like this, and scale these down along the z-axis like this. Apply rotation and scale. Okay, this looks pretty good so far. Now we're going to select the stem, go to the bottom, select the middle vertex, and add some vertices to the selection. Create a vertex group and add all of these vertices to the group. So basically what we're gonna do now is add some roots, or as they're called, mycelial threads. They're very much like roots, so we're gonna add a particle system. It will be a hair type particle system. Gonna go into vertex groups right away and select group for density. So now all of the hair grows from the very bottom of the stem. We're gonna set the number to 300, hair length to 0.1. Gonna check advanced. normal will be 0.025, Z will be minus 0.1, random will be 0.2. Go into the display panel and increase the number of steps to 4. It's a bit of a way to subdivide those here so they've got more vertices in them. And also increase Brownian to 0.2. So as you can see, they look quite organic like this. I'm gonna apply rotation and scale, but they've got a bit too much upward curvature, so we're gonna comb those roots like this. Increase this like this. I'll bring them down a bit. Okay. Now let's grab both of these and I'm gonna scale them down a bit so they can fit entirely to the camera view. By rotation and scale. Now let's get into materials. So we're gonna add the material for the stem first. So the diffuse color will be red 0.8, green 0.7, and blue 0.5. So light shade of yellow, beige. Set the specular intensity to 0.05, hardness to 20. And there's gonna be 5 textures into this stem material. First texture will be a musgrave texture. Let's set contrast to 0.6. Gonna use a generated coordinates with a cube projection. Set the Z size to 2 so they don't look too elongated along the Z-axis. Gonna uncheck color, select view space, use the best quality, enable normal, and set it to 0.2. Create some sort of bumpiness into this texture. The second texture will also be a musgrave texture with a brightness of 0, contrast of 0.8. We're gonna use a ridged multifractal as the type. Set the size to 0.15. We're gonna use generated and cube as the projection. Set the Z size to 2.0. Uncheck color, enable normal, and set it to 0.25. Use view space and the best quality. Now the third texture will be a cloud texture with a depth of 24. We're gonna use generated coordinates with a cube projection. Set the Z size to 2. Increase color to 1.1. Enable normal and set it to 0.5. 0.1, excuse me, view space, and best quality. Now for the color, we'll use a red of 0.37, green 0.27, and blue 0.12. So it's a brown shade. The fourth texture will be a blend texture. We're gonna enable a ramp, use an ease interpolation. The first color stop will be at 0, and the second will be at 0.37. So this color stop will be transparent, and this one will be black. Make sure rotation and scale are applied at this point. The horizontal progression, and here we're gonna also use easing, and we're gonna use a generated coordinates. We're also gonna map the x into the z-axis. And uncheck color and enable stencil. So the point of this texture is that the very last texture will only be present in the bottom of the stem. So the last texture will be a clouds texture. Gonna set the brightness to 1.2, contrast to 2, hard noise, size of 0.1, depth 1, generated coordinates, cube projection, z size of 2, check color, enable normal at 0.5, best quality, and view space. It's also a good idea to save your project often, like I do. Now let's add a material for those roots. Add a new material. We're gonna copy the stem material because it's gonna have many similarities. Like this. Can go into strand and select a root size of 3, tip size of 0.25, disable tendon shading, and use a shape of -0.9. So they look very spiky. Now let's go into texture, and we're gonna remove all 5 textures that we created. This material will only have one texture. It's gonna be a blend texture. We're gonna use ramp. First color stop will be transparent, and the other will be a dark shade of brown. So red 0.027, green 0.018, blue 0.009. We're gonna use strand particle as the coordinates. Basically what this does is that the root of the roots, if you want, will be transparent, and the tip of the roots will be much darker. Now let's add some materials to the cap. There's gonna be two materials in the cap. But first, I'm gonna add some scenes, as we're gonna be using UV mapping for the cap. So let's select this edge loops. We're gonna mark these edges as seams. Now let's add the first material, diffuse intensity of 0.5, specular intensity 0.05, hardness of 20. I'm gonna add an image texture. I will of course be placing a link in the description to access this picture so you guys can use it as you're working along. We're gonna increase the red to 1.1 and the saturation to 1.1. Enable normal, set this to 0.5. Best quality view space, apply rotation and scale. Let's select the middle vertex and increase the number of selected vertices until we've got all the faces that are above the seam line. So these faces will have this red with white dots texture. Let's go into UV editing mode, add our image. And unwrap this. Move them over the mushroom and scale them so that we're grabbing as much of the texture as possible. Like this. Now we're gonna invert the selection. So we've got the faces that are under the seam line. And also, I believe I've forgotten something important. In the particle system, make sure to use the material that we created for the roots here, so that the roots don't have the same material as the stem. And go back into our cap, add another material. We're gonna assign this material to those faces. Specular intensity is 0.05, hardness 20. Gonna add an image texture. I will add a link into the video description for you guys to get the picture. It's called mushroom gills. Basically, it's what under the cap of a mushroom. Let's go into UV editing. Select the mushroom gills texture and unwrap. Then over the picture and select as much of the texture as possible. this. Make sure it's mapped to UV. Now we're also gonna add a plane to create some sort of ground to our scene. Scale it up along the X and Y axis. Like this, apply rotation and scale. Add a few subdivisions like this. We're gonna add a subdivision surface modifier with 2 subdivisions and a displace modifier. I've set the mid-level to 0.25. Gonna be using a cloud texture, smooth shading, depth of 24, and a size of 1.65, like this. Apply rotation and scale. And we're gonna add a material for this ground. So specular intensity 0.02, hardness 20. Let's add an image texture. Again, there will be a link to get this picture into the video description. Set the repeat to 2 and mirror on the X and Y axis. Let's go into UV editing mode. Set a dirt texture and unwrap. Now let's add lights to our scene. We're going to be using 2 lights, sunlight and the light. Let's move them both up. Like this, maybe a bit more. Rotate them. So the sunlight, we'll be using a ray shadow with 8 samples. Soft size of 0.8 and constant QMC for better quality. The Hemelight will have an energy of 0.1, so weak Hemelight. Now let's try rendering this scene. Let's see what we baked. As you can see, I'd say the result is pretty good. Pretty much looks like what it should. Now we're gonna animate this mushroom a little bit. Of course, mushrooms don't move a lot. However, like everything that lives, they grow. So we're gonna start this mushroom very small and grow it into a full mature mushroom. So let's start by snapping the cursor to the very lowest vertex of the stem, like this. And select the stem and the cap and set their origins to the 3D cursor. I'm gonna set the end frame to 200. This will be a 200 frame animation. Now go to frame 100 and add a scale keyframe for the stem and cap. Now let's go to frame 1. Grab both the stem and the cap and scale them down to 0.05. So they're very small. Don't see them at all. Let's add a scale keyframe for both. Like this. Let's try playing this animation. Like this. And there's also another thing that changes in mushrooms. It's the shape of their caps. It starts out very spherical, then it flattens, and then it inverts to scatter the spores. So let's select the cap and add 2 shape keys. So the first shape key will be to make this cap more spherical. Make sure rotation and scale are applied. I'm gonna use proportional editing with a sharp fall off. And we're gonna select the seam loop like this. I'm gonna move this down along the z-axis and scale these down like this. So we get something that looks like a sphere. And the second keyframe will be used to invert the cap. So again, select the seam loop like this. We're gonna scale it up along the X and Y axis like this. And we're gonna move it up. This. Now let's select a few vertices along the loop. Gonna move them further up, but this time with a smooth fall off. Like this. Maybe it's just a bit too much. So you can see the cap inverts. So the first keyframe will be used from frames 1 to 100. So at frame 1, it's gonna be fully spherical. Use a keyframe here. At frame 100, it's flat. So value at 0 and insert a keyframe. And the second key shape. Here I'm gonna insert a keyframe for a value of 0. Go to frame 200. Set the value to 1. And insert a keyframe. Now let's try playing this animation. So you can see this looks pretty much like the life of a mushroom. However, maybe the cap looks a bit big. So when it's into sphere. So up a bit. Okay, so at frame 200, our mushroom is a bit too big. So we're gonna adjust the camera, increase focal length, and maybe move it up a bit like this, so we can see all our mushroom. Let's take a look what this looks like. Well, that looks pretty good, I would say. And here is a video of the final render. This is what you should get, something like that. You can also remove the ground from the render to see what the roots look like. And this concludes our mushroom tutorial. If you are interested in watching more Blender 3D modeling tutorials, please visit my YouTube channel. And until then, happy modeling, everyone.